Good morning, everyone. I'd like to introduce Mitchell Silber, the Executive Director of the Community Security Initiative.
Thanks, Seth. As Seth mentioned, I'm the Executive Director for the Community Security Initiative. And on behalf of our team, I wanted to welcome all of you to our first edition to the Consultants Corner. So Consultants Corner, if you've previously received a New York State hate crime grant or a federal nonprofit security grant, these webinars are going to help you move forward with your projects. And each week, we're going to have a session and we'll cover tailored topics, and our consultants will respond to related questions. These are going to be interactive sessions designed to help you ensure that your security installations achieve your goals and demonstrate how you need to navigate what's generally considered a somewhat complex process with positive results for your organization. Some of our upcoming sessions will even include guidance on specific equipment issues. And leading these two sessions, these sessions will be two security professionals, each with over 10 years of direct experience in grant applications and project management. And I'll introduce them a little bit later this morning. However, our first session is going to include information from the Hebrew Free Loan Society's Security and Infrastructure Loan Program that can help you finance your improvements immediately and bridge the gap until you receive your reimbursement. Joining us this morning from Hebrew Free Loan Society are going to be Darren Scott, who is the Director of Finance and Administration, who has a long history of working in the Jewish philanthropic world at the Jewish Child Care Association, serving as the Assistant Controller there, as well as Fred Cohen, who's their financial analyst on loans, who spent 33 years at Alliance Bernstein, primarily as a Senior Vice President, Director of Municipal Bond Trading. So with that, let me turn it over to Darren and Fred, and thank you guys for joining us this morning.
Thank you, Mitchell. First of all, I think on behalf of all of the participants in this webinar, we want to thank you and your team for everything you do for the Jewish community to enhance the security and safety of everyone who takes advantage of all the facilities that are out there. So again, on behalf of everyone, we want to thank you. Moving on to our presentation. The Hebrew Free Loan Society has established a fund to provide interest-free and no-fee loans to Jewish organizations that have received the grants that we're talking about. As you know, the grant process requires anyone with a grant to actually lay out the funds, do the work, and then get reimbursed upon completion of the work. Unfortunately, many organizations do not have the funds to lay it out to then get reimbursed. Our loan program, in a nutshell, is designed that we will lend you the money interest-free, you will do the work, and then when you get reimbursed, you pay us back. So that is pretty simple. What the program is in a nutshell, and we're trying to achieve. We want to help everyone out there, no matter what their financial capability is, to get the work done and take advantage of these grants. So a few bullet points. Any Jewish nonprofit in the 5 boroughs in Westchester, Long Island, and Northern New Jersey is eligible for one of our loans. The loans are up to $150,000, up to the amount of your grant. Again, no interest, no fee. And you can use the money for most of the physical purposes that you're going to get grants for: windows, doors, access, cameras, everything in that category. Now, one thing, we are a lender, and in exchange for interest-free loans, we don't want to take any risk. So we will ask borrowers to provide us with credit statements, much like a bank, that we will do some work on the credit worthiness of any borrower. The alternative is that borrowers may give us guarantors who will then be our primary credit for our loan. I don't want to get into the details too much on that, but again, keep in mind that we will look to either the credit of the borrower, the institution itself, or to the grantors that they provide us. Again, our loans will pretty much match the project. And again, we're looking to work with you to come up with creative ways to provide financing to get the work done. That's a nutshell of what the program is. I have a formal FAQ, which will be sent out later. It has my contact information. It has our website address. You get more information. And we're open. Again, we're pretty flexible. We work pretty quickly. and we look forward to working with anyone. One thing, as you're going to hear, it's going to take a while for you to make your way through the process. Our loans are typically made towards the end of the process when you're shovel ready. So people typically come to us formally towards the end of the process. Now, you can come in early, give me a call, send me an email, and say, Fred, here's my situation. Would I qualify for a loan right now? So we can sort of pre-qualify you, so that way you can look at the financial side, we can talk about it, and you can maybe, put this aside to say, okay, if things don't change, I'm pre-qualified with HFLS, I can now move forward knowing I'll have the financing in place. So again, I think, my contact information is out there. Please give me a call or an email, and we look forward to working with anyone who needs our funds. And I'll turn it back for any questions.
Good morning, Fred, and thanks for your time today, you and Darren. The only question we have so far is, and I'll have it from a couple of people, is it's specific to a county. The participants are asking if synagogues in Rockland County are eligible. And I think based on what you said just a few minutes ago that they are not. However, maybe you can give them some direction if they're not in your catchment area, where they might be able to get a similar program.
You get this question, and right now this program is limited to sort of the UJA catchment area, which is the 5 boroughs, Nassau, Suffolk, and Westchester. So I don't really have a good answer for those of you in Rockland. I'm sorry, but I don't have a good answer.
All right, Seth, I don't see any other questions at this point. However, I will be monitoring the chat box for questions, as well as one of my colleagues. If you have any questions about Hebrew Free Loan, we'll try to get to them later. But Seth or Mitch?
I'm going to turn it back over to Mitch.
And Fred, if you don't mind, could you just put your email in the chat? I've noticed some people have asked for that.
Okay, I will do that. Sure.
Great. All right, so now we're going to turn to sort of the meat and potatoes of our Consultants Corner, and we're really pleased to be joined by 2 security experts. The first, Dov Horowitz, who works with CSI as really a procurement and grant consultant, working very closely with our regional security managers. And he formerly spent time at New York State DSHES, the Department of Homeland Security, which is the entity that is dealing with the granting of these grants. So he understands how the process works from the inside, and a great asset to our team. And he'll be joined by Ilya Omansky, who's a prominent security specialist. He in his career has done a wide variety of risk mitigation and resilience type work, including threat and vulnerability assessments, risk management framework development, design and implementation, technological, physical, and operational asset protection controls, among other things. So with that, let me turn it over to Dov and Ilya. Thanks so much, guys.
All right, thank you, Mitch, and thank you to the whole CSI team. There's a lot that goes behind this production, and we want to make sure it's valuable to the community, so thank you to you guys. We can move ahead, Seth, with the slides. I'm Dov Horowitz. I recognize a lot of names here, a lot of organizations. It's good to see you. So a lot of you, we've already kind of started moving the needle a bit, we want to make sure we can kind of share that knowledge and that ability with everybody. So what is Consultants Corner? What are we trying to do here? We know there's a very cumbersome process. It's a very new process to a lot of organizations, and there's a lot of information. We really want to be there to help every organization move forward, follow the procurement rules correctly from the state, help the locations go forward with their projects, actually design good security programs, why we've partnered with Ilya and the whole team here, and to take your questions. I'll add, beyond even just questions, the questions will help us tailor future sessions. If you have some experiences you want to share, please feel free to share that in the chat. I think it's very valuable for us to hear from each other with like-minded organizations of what our experience was. We've all gone through this, a similar synagogue, a similar school. If one got through, we can all do it. So sharing some of those hurdles, those lessons learned is very valuable. The goal will be to keep these weekly and recurring. We've learned there's so much information. We can't just put it all out there. We want to just kind of move the needle step by step. And we hope to provide weekly topics like this week with the Hebrew Free Loan. And as based on questions, based on where we see the attention is needed, we will design the next weeks and share that information before the session. So, if you want to jump on and hopefully everyone can continue and really get a good program going. Again, this grant this session is for grantees of the current programs. Meaning we're not going to talk about future applications, but if you received the latest round of the hate crimes grant, right, the Securing Communities Against Hate Crimes, the most recent nonprofit security grant program, but also older ones, right? So there's going to be a few different people in different stages of their process. And so we'll just have to kind of share some things you might already know, but some things will move forward. And based on these questions, we'll know how we want to tailor future sessions. Okay, Seth, thank you. Very important disclaimer, everybody. Right, we are a nonprofit resource. The CSI team from JCRC, myself and Ilya, we are a nonprofit resource unaffiliated with DSHES in New York State. We do not speak for them. Having familiarity with the process, with the rules, we can guide you through pretty much most of what you need to do, as well as add on what you need to help with your procurement, with your bidding, with your design, which the state most likely won't really be able to help with. So the most important thing is knowing who your representative is. When you got your initial email letting you know of your award, it should have come directly from your grant rep from New York State Division of Homeland Security and Emergency Services. This is your partner. They're there to help you. And the important thing for us to realize, because sometimes, we might get concerned if we should reach out or ask a question. We always support you confirming with them and making that close relationship. But this money from the grant that you applied for is allocated to you. If it doesn't go to you, it does not go to the organization. It does not go anywhere else, and it just gets unused. So the state wants you to utilize your funding. The only main thing is we got to make sure we do it right. We follow the rules. So make sure to know who your grant is. If you're not sure who your grant rep is, if you have signed into eGrants, which we'll talk into a little later, it should identify that for you, as well as they will pepper you with reminders and some emails here and there. So get to know your rep. Next slide, please. So the real big goal here, everybody, is that especially if you're newer, if you're just received your award, it's your first time through, there is a lot of information. We really want to just put those first steps, and for those of you who are a little further on, we'll have other elements, like we're going to talk about help with the project management on the second part of this presentation. But we want to make sure that we can really help you move the needle. We saw that poll in the beginning. Some of us are on here, we're not really sure which grant it is. How do we determine that? And that's important because there's some nuances, there's some differences, even though both grants, all the grants you've received are at this time still administered by New York State Division of Homeland Security, there are some differences in the rules. So we're going to be starting today, and those of you who have worked with me with your regional manager, you know that we start sometimes from the basics. So some of you we might see some repetition, and feel free if you have moved the needle a little further to share in the chat what worked for you. So we're going to start with these really early steps, and then we'll go into the procurement stuff. But important point, also work closely with your regional security manager. They will bring myself and Ilya in as needed to make sure you have the guidance and resources and answers to your questions if it's not answered here, or to make sure we can bring it to the next session. Next slide, please. So, like I said, almost the first thing we need to do is identify which grant we have. We're not going to be talking in these consultants' corners about applying for future grants. It's really for those who've just received or even previous years, because it's still in your contract period. So there's two awards for those of you who are brand new to this, right? There's the NSGP, the Nonprofit Security Grant Program, and there's the Securing Communities Against Hate Crimes Grant, the SCAHC, both currently administered by the state DHSES. Again, we said they're mostly similar in administration. There's a lot of similar rules, but there are some big differences. So knowing which grant you have, lets you know we can help you navigate that, and your contract period, which we'll also talk about in a moment. So how do I know which grant I have? How do I figure that out, right? A few of us said we don't know. So let's move on. So there's some easy tells. First of all, I mean, I said it's going to be basic for a lot of you, and I apologize, but a lot of us, this is very, very important. This is honestly, when we do a one-on-one assistance, this is where we start. So when you were awarded the grant, your rep likely specified it, even in the subject line of your email, and spelled it out, right? Nonprofit security grant program or securing communities against hate crimes. Alternatively, if you've signed into eGrants, if you're familiar with eGrants, which we'll talk about next, there's project numbers. Additionally, in your contract, every page has a project number. So now, this is my interpretation. I can't tell you if this is exactly what it stands for, but if your grant starts with an HC in your number, right, it'll be followed by the number of your award. It will say it means you have a hate crimes grant. And if your project number starts with HS, you have the NSGP, a Homeland Security grant. I don't know if that's necessarily what that means in terms of the acronyms, but in the code, it does align with your grant. So multiple ways to identify. Again, if you're not sure, please reach out to your regional security manager, myself directly, whatever way works best, and feel free to share your contract if that would help us to identify and show you what we're looking at. Next slide, please. So we mentioned eGrants a few times. Sometimes when you see the state presentation or you just hear about eGrants, you don't know what this is. So especially if we applied 2 years ago and the person who applied for the grant is no longer with your organization, or maybe you haven't touched it in 2 years and you totally forgot. eGrants is the online tool managed by DSHES. This is where you applied for both grants currently. And it's also where you administer, where you do your project management, you do your quarterly reports, things we won't get into today. But the first step is knowing where eGrants is. This is the link you can follow. We can paste it in and share it later. And if you don't remember your login, you can email New York State Division of Homeland Security directly to help you log in again, reset your password, because you got to be in this. This is where it happens. This is where the magic happens. So you got to make sure you're in eGrants. All right, next slide, please. So the next piece is, I'll also add, there are some other additional acronyms for the grants as the years have gone on. So if you're not sure, we can always help you identify by sharing your contract with our team. We can tell you which grant you have. So now, the two most recent grants, right? If you have a fiscal year 2019-2020 hate crimes grant, your contract period starts January 1st. So you actually can't really do anything yet. It was specified within the emails you got from the state. It was specified. If you have moved forward at all, you'll see this, but maybe it's buried in. So we want to be clear. You got a 2-year period, but it's not started yet. There really is very little you can do. You might not even be able to sign your contract, what they call executing your contract, which is done again in eGrants. You may not be able to do it yet because they're just kind of waiting till that start date. So don't get involved with vendors yet. Don't be communicating with whoever you think might be bidding eventually. Really, you got to just kind of wait for this period to begin. In the interim, you can kind of think about what you want to do a little more in detail, right? Because when you applied, this many cameras, hardened doors, whatever it may be, and you can start thinking about how you want to do it internally, but don't actually make any movement that would especially utilize any funds. You have to be in the contract period and you have to follow the procurement process. But right now, if you have the hate crimes grant, you really need the newest one, you need to wait. If you have the fiscal year 2021 NSGP, the most recent NSGP, the federal grant, also administered by the state, their contract period did begin. It began on September 1st, 2021 with an end date of August 31st, 2024. Still, though, you cannot move forward. The numero uno step you always have to do is have your contract executed. Again, you do this in eGrants. The state provides the step-by-step guidance, and we can also help you as well, always, on going through the execution. But really, that is your first thing. You cannot move forward. Don't have funds allocated anywhere. Don't be talking with vendors. It really is very strict that this has to happen first. The next big step, which is beyond today's session, is working on your environmental and historic preservation submission, which is approval from the feds, and we'll talk on in future sessions. Those of you familiar with the grant, with the NSGP, have done these before, but a very important document. Now, if I had a previous award, how do I determine the dates of our contract? Next slide, please. So this is a cutout from what your contract should look like, or very similar. And it will say right there, we point out, it says your initial contract period. The important thing to note is you might have received an extension. So make sure if you have the emails and documentation that proves it, and you're aware of when the extension was until. But at least from the start, whether you have the most recent hate crimes or NSGP grants, your contract period will state that out. Again, you haven't been able to move forward with the contract for the hate crimes grant, so you won't have this document yet, but we all know, right? It doesn't start till January 1. So you won't have this contract yet. Okay, next slide, please, Seth. So next, like we said, let's reiterate it. Let's beat this to the ground. With the new hate crimes grant, there's very little you can do. You might not even be able to sign your contract yet. It might not be ready. They probably are just holding off so we don't get ahead of ourselves if the contract period is January 1. Otherwise, if you have the NSGP, or if somehow you have an older NSGP or hate crimes grant that you haven't executed, make sure you do that. Make sure you go on to eGrants and you sign the contract for yourself so you can move forward. And if it is an NSGP, you have to do your EHP, the Environmental Historic Preservation. This is a kind of mapped out plan of where you want to do your installations. This will be a very important document and something we will talk about in the future, because it does give out your design to your vendors, how you expect it to be. So if you can design it right on the front end and let your vendors, let your installers know what you expect, you can have thought out your program prior, and that's, again, something that our team will be available to help you really line it up. Next slide, please. So we mentioned already, right, there's some of you on this, I think it was about 9 or 10 locations that had at least also a previous NSGP or even a hate crimes grant. So again, this is super important, because if your contract's not executed, you won't get reimbursed if you allocate some funds. And again, same issue if you have an NSGP and haven't approved your EHP. So, and if you do have that, if you have your contract executed, and for an NSGP and EHP, that's when you can begin advertising and bidding. Again, these are topics we will continue to talk. We hope to keep this a weekly session. Some of these can get pretty nuanced, and there's a lot of rules, but we want to help you really dig in and navigate. There's the MWBE requirements for minority women-owned businesses. There's the bid process, which is based on thresholds of your cost, which things that you really have to follow the rules and be aware of. And if it's your first time through, it can be overwhelming. So we really want to help you cross that C. The most important thing I'll close on is that really keep notes and records of everything. If you talk to a vendor, you put your ad together for the newspaper, you attended this session, whatever it is, keep notes and records, because when you ever get visited or potentially audited by the state, you can always show you followed the rules. You made this good faith effort. One of the most important terms you'll hear is good faith effort to follow along in the procurement process. So keep those notes, keep those records. You'll hear that from the state as well, to really, the best records you can keep potentially will really be helpful to you. One thing, so the next piece we're really going to talk about is how to really design your specs and deal with the vendors. Many of you may not be there. There are some attendees on this session who are a little further along and at that point. So we're gonna begin starting, and that's what we'll turn over to Ilya in a moment. Next slide, to start understanding the project management piece of how to deal with the vendors, how to make sure we have a good security program, and I'll let him speak to introducing that in the details. Before I do turn it over, please note your security manager from the CSI team. Their email address is here. I'm sure many of you are very familiar. We want to work with you closely. Any questions, feel free to share with them if this wasn't the right venue. And make sure that if it helps, to share your contract, share your EHP. We can always review and give our insight and help move along the process in that manner. With that, thank you very much. I know a lot of this was very early first step things, but sometimes that's where we need to start, and we'll continue moving every week. Thank you.
All right. It's a privilege to be here, and I really appreciate the efforts that JCRC team has put forward to organize this seminar, and to also give everyone an opportunity to voice their concerns, share their challenges. And this is a very good forum. I hope that it will be useful for everyone who's joining, and please share this resource with everyone. My name is Omansky. I also recognize some of the names of attendees on this list, and it's very good to see some of you, and those that are on video, and good to see the names of folks that I've been in contact with before. Welcome. Thanks for joining. And I'll only speak for a few minutes because we want to give everyone an opportunity to ask their questions, and please use the chat window to put them in. So here is where I've had a lot of experience with different facilities. Primarily, it really starts immediately after those steps that Dov outlined. And that is the juncture when the facilities team says, okay, well, so I finished saying that the team at any facility will have to make a decision as to how to move on, right? So there's a lot of things to implement, a lot of different technologies. It could also include improving your security force. It could also include some training activities. And typically, facilities that I've worked with will end up probably with at least nine or maybe more different categories of things that they would want to implement. Now, let's take a deep breath, everyone, and just think for a second about two words: project management. And let me just share with you a hypothetical story. A story is of a facility similar to many of those that you represent. And there is a team of people who are, like yourselves, are looking to implement different types of upgrades. And that team has, let's say 5 different categories of things to put into their facility. Nobody on the team is designated as a project manager. So the team looks at each other and has these very interesting conversations about how to do things. What are we going to do? How are we going to move on? But still, there is no project manager. And the conversations continue day after day. We will do this and we will do that. Let's put some efforts together. Let's do these steps, or let's set some dates. But there is no project manager. There is no single person that has been given this difficult challenge to carry the project forward, meaning that at some point the project has to move on into an implementation phase, meaning that you'll have to start dealing with vendors and start setting real dates and milestones for things to be completed. Right, that could be some communication with your grant manager at the on the government side. It could be perhaps a follow-up that JCRC could help you with, right? But what I noticed mostly is that there are great teams of very eager individuals that come together to get things done. But because they're teams, not a single person takes the responsibility to do things. And so sometimes teams, they either get to some conflict points. Like one person says, well, you know what, we need to put the video first. The other person says, no, wait, if video gets put in first, we don't know, we probably will miss out on the opportunity to put in intrusion detection. The other person raises a hand and says, but wait a second, weren't we supposed to harden our doors first? And this is the type of a conversation that I hear very, very often. Now, the reason why I asked you to take a deep breath is because we all at JCRC completely respect the fact that everybody wears many hats in your organizations. We also respect the fact that very few of you, if anyone, has experience in designing and implementing security measures. Okay, so if I say to you that there is a video analytics system that has crowd detection capabilities, and also it has object detection capabilities, and also it works on a distributed network that is fail secure. You'll shrug your shoulders. You'll say to me, "I'm sorry, what are you talking about?" Right? So we're here to continue this conversation going forward, so that we can help point you in the right direction of whom to ask. But most importantly, I think please start thinking about, rather than addressing a lot of these projects as a team, by also thinking about who on your team can take the project forward as a project manager. This person would be responsible for creating schedules, for helping understand the sequence of different implementations, because these questions that I just raised, like do we put video first, or intercoms, or guards, or hardened doors, they are super important. If you harden your doors, but you didn't put intrusion detection, right, you'll have to retrofit those doors again. So you'll have to pay twice for somebody to come back and do the work. So obviously that doesn't make any sense. And so don't feel like all of this is only on your team's shoulders, or on the shoulders of the project manager. You can always ask questions in a forum like this. You can always reach out to your regional security manager and ask for a little bit of assistance. And JCRC has been an invaluable source on their website to help with all sorts of decision-making about different vendors you're going to be dealing with, and the process of implementing different solutions for upgrading security of your facility. So if you don't take away anything else from what I'm saying, please remember these two words: project management. There has to be some person, one individual, who's responsible for taking the rest of the team along into implementing the project. That person likely will have to, carry the largest burden of, like I said, building schedules, dealing with different contractors, and figuring out the sequence of implementation, and then dealing with the individuals who are responsible for dispersing your funds, or for that matter, with individuals who are giving you a bridge loan, just like we heard about from our friends at the Hebrew Free Loan. So it's very important that that effort is centralized, and that you also create some documentation that can help you at least keep track of the steps you're taking and the sequences that you're building. Because what I noticed is that as many conversations I've been a part of, right, there's very rarely any note-taking. There's very rarely any documentation that gets created to understand like what has been discussed during the previous meeting, right? So those are my 2 cents. I want to give everyone an opportunity to ask their questions. I see that there are, wow, already 11 questions, 11 comments here. So let's start with Terry, I guess, helping us process some of these questions, and let's begin the conversation.
It's actually going to be me, Ilya, and there are some questions that have come in.
Appreciate it.
The first is a generic question for Consultants Corner, asking about the frequency of these meetings. We're going to be doing these on Tuesdays at 10 a.m. on a recurring basis, Tuesdays at 10 a.m. And each meeting will discuss a different topic. And of course, we will try to be responsive to the concerns of the community in selecting those topics.
Bill, before we go forward with the questions, I'm just going to put a quick poll up onto the screen that will start.
Yes, thank you everyone for this. This really helps us design the next sessions and understand where the struggle points are so we can help move the needle. Working with vendors will definitely be a big piece of what we discuss going forward.
Ready to roll?
Yep.
Okay. The next two questions are really substantive. They get into the weeds, and I bet you a lot of folks have the same question. Very granular. Real world here. What if the quotes that an applicant received well over a year ago, right? We just got the 2019-2020 hate crimes awards. Those applications were done a long time ago. The quotes that an organization got to fill out those applications might be meaningless by now because of the way pricing has increased. Let's say an institution submitted for bollards, and now the prices have gone up and they've blown the estimated budget. What are the options for that organization?
Gotcha. Thank you, Bill. Again, thank you to everyone. It's a good question, and I'll say this, I enjoy the question session of this more. I really want to hear from people and people share their thoughts. And even we already saw a response to that question, which I'll agree with. The reality is on the bid you received should have a bid stands for a certain amount of date for how long it's an eligible price quote. And unfortunately, if you didn't utilize it in that time frame, you might have to get a new quote from the vendor. How this applies to your grant, well, if you didn't select a vendor yet, you might need to get 3 bids again, right? So you know the rules if you're at this part of the process. Assuming bollards are over the 10K threshold, so you'll likely have to get, if this is not the one the vendor you selected, you might have to get bids again. And the reality is, for how it applies to the funding that's allocated, you obviously have to work within your funding allowance. So if all of a sudden you can get 1 less ballard, you obviously can't do the full project. At this point, I would make sure to reiterate that with your state rep. Say, hey, the bid we originally received, kind of expired. We got a new quote. This is what we're moving forward, but they can do only 5 ballards instead of 6, which we initially were trying to do, and just get their okay before you move forward on a big process like that, a big project like that.
All right, thanks, Doug. Next question is from a small synagogue in Manhattan. 2019 NSGP award winner. They've already implemented a few projects from that grant program. They're still trying to figure out their options for new exterior doors. Can you speak about how to determine door options needs, specifications, and do we refer vendors that have experience with security doors?
So I definitely want to hear from other members of the team as well. But the short answer is we can't refer anyone. We are definitely organizations, companies out there that we can assist in ensuring that they are aware of your advertisement. But I think this is something we can work with you offline to really, with your regional security manager, myself, and Ilya, to make sure you have the right people, and more importantly, that it's designed right. As you install a door, Ilya already mentioned a few components that you have to think about. So instead of just finding any vendor, we want to make sure you can utilize them the best.
I'd also add here that in some categories, and I just saw questions lately related to doors, it's unfortunately a challenge in New York City to find some vendors. We're certainly building our capability to identify capable vendors that exist in the market, and your regional security manager can speak to you about what their experience has been at other facilities that may have implemented it. But there's a lot of community knowledge that's coming through to JCRC, and so I think please don't feel like you're left out, and just reach out to your regional security manager.
So that question was posed by Andrew, and he says he's in Manhattan. So your regional security manager is Terry, who's on the call. The next step I would take to keep the ball moving, and that's what this team wants to be here for, is share with him whether it's your contract or at least the money you have allocated, right? Is it a small project? Is it multiple exterior doors? Being a Manhattan location, it's probably not too many doors, but we want to make sure we help you move in the right way. So on this forum is probably not the best place to put out names of companies, but Terry and I partner a lot working with locations, and that's your best move.
And if this is more for the leadership of this team, I believe we have kind of a long-term effort to establish lists of vendors in each project area without necessarily making recommendations, but just collecting information on who's out there doing work in this particular space. Okay, next question. Do you have someone on your team that can help us decide how to spend the money? And I think we're talking about prioritizing projects. We were approved for lots of categories, and I'm not sure how to proceed. I can't complete the EHP until we finalize our plans. That's true. Can you help?
So Moshe, we would love to help. Obviously, a lot of details we probably can't do on this call with everyone, but it's to get the conversation going. I'm not sure what borough you're in. Make sure you communicate with your regional security manager, and they'll work with myself and Ilya. And like we said, I'm glad you brought up the EHP, the Environmental Historical Preservation, a requirement of the federal nonprofit security grant program. And like we said, this helps you design your layout. So we would love to be involved in this process and really help you design. Moshe, if you're still listening, which borough are you in, or county? And we'll make sure you get the right regional security manager. Most are on the call today. Ilya, anything else you want to add about how we can help them categorizing and working on their EHP?
Right. So I think, first of all, having contact with the regional security manager is the right way to go. What we typically do is we then take a look at what your facility needs. There's definitely a way to prioritize these projects, not only just which one is a more significant need, but also to sequence the implementation, because unfortunately a lot of facilities end up spending twice the money on things that are out of sequence. They install cameras, but they forgot that there is some additional work that needed to be done in those areas, and they have to remove them and reinstall them. So the same happens with doors, the same happens with intrusion detection, and all sorts of other systems. And so we certainly can assist you with that. The other thing that our team can help you with is to look at how you're budgeting for those projects, and what is the realistic budget. I just saw a comment earlier about soaring costs. So that's very true. Obviously, the prices for different types of equipment are affected by, like everything else, the issues with the supply chain. So certain vendors have been increasing the prices for equipment that they sell and install. Labor rates may be increasing as well. So certainly something that we can help you navigate.
All right, thank you very much. Questions are still coming in. Again, a lot of the attendees are from Rockland County. I get a lot of inquiries from Rockland County because I'm on the border, being in Westchester. So the question is, since Rockland County is not in the JCRC-New York catchment area, where can institutions in Rockland turn to for similar assistance that we provide on the other side of the river?
So Bill, I think what we're going to advise is to send an email to our general CSI help email that's in the chat, and then we can figure out, based on capacity, based on the needs, how we can help. As we mentioned, similar to Hebrew Loan Society, our area of responsibility doesn't include Rockland, but at the same time, we of course want to be helpful as much as we can. So just shoot us an email, and offline we'll talk about what we can do depending on your specific needs.
Thank you, Mitch. Appreciate that. A lot of, I know this from experience, a lot of institutions, because of the timelines, the project was initiated by somebody who's no longer with the organization, and, surprise, you have an award and you're now, granted the responsibility to follow through with this. So how can, for those that don't know, how can an organization move on to the next step once they get their award and start filling out the EHP form? Where do they go for that? How do they do that? What's required?
Gotcha. Thanks, Bill. And you started with a good point that I want to share with everyone. What we're putting forward here, even when some of the answers are very simple, is what we see in the field, like Bill just mentioned, what the questions are, what's next. Honestly, make sure you have, for someone, if you inherited a project and you're not sure what's next, make sure you have your eGrants app, your eGrants access. This is a real thing we see. What's eGrants, right? That's why we mentioned it here before. Make sure you have that access. If someone left and you need to take over, we can share again the email that we had before about to update your account so you can be the person. The EHP submission for the federal grant, that's the NSGP, is more of an email, right? There's a form. I put a link in the chat. There's also the actual documents. There's actually a lot of pictures you need to provide. The form alone won't be everything, but it can help you get started. And it is definitely, the EHP is a big piece of like a topic that we'll have in this session, these Consultants Corner. So you can get started with the EHP. If you want to move forward before our Consultants Corner gets there, definitely reach out to your regional security manager. Again, make sure your contract's executed first. And the EHP does have to be complete before you move forward or allocate any funds for these projects. Was that kind of the question, Bill?
Well, yeah, are the instructions for that in the contract once it's executed? Does it specify that they need to do an EHP and where to go and all that?
So the EHP rules will come from the state. It might not be in the contract per se, but it will come from the state, and they've put together very detailed step-by-step EHP documentation. We're not going to change that, right? We're going to work with your location to understand what the state's needs are, what the state describes to you in their EHP documentation. When you received your award, you should have been invited to a state webinar. Again, there's so much information there. Sometimes it can be overwhelming, and that's why we're kind of trying to break it out piece by piece. EHP is a big, important piece. Likely it'll probably be our next main topic. But those are your two big steps. Sign your contract and EHP. From there, once your EHP is approved, right, you have to get the email back from the state from your rep, right? We mentioned identifying your rep, that you are approved, and now you can move forward. Until then, you are in a holding pattern. No clear way to say it. You're in a holding pattern until you have both things for the NSGP. For the hate crimes grant, you do not need an EHP, just to keep that point clear.
All right, thanks, Dov. And just to confirm, that's going to be we're going to drill down deeper specifically into the EHPs in a future Consultants Corner.
Definitely.
Okay, good questions continue to come in. Can one of you give us a broad overview of the MWBE thresholds, what that is and what the requirements are? Sure,
I'll jump in there too. MWBE, minority and woman-owned business enterprise, are required. They're actually in your contract states the requirements for the Security Communities Against Hate Crimes grant. And again, we don't want to get too in the weeds today, another future topic, but 30% of your award. So if you have 50 grand in your hate crimes award, 30% has to be allocated to one of these types of businesses. And how do we know who is an MWBE? There is state approved vendors who have either a minority or woman-owned certification. They'll have to be able to provide this. They'll have official numbers. The state your rep at DSHES can confirm who it is. And we have identified, the CSI team, who some of these vendors are. So when you put out your bid, we can make sure that they're bidding as well to help you get to your threshold. But you really need to meet that 30% threshold. They've clarified, and the state has clarified in other sessions, either minority or woman. They're usually not both. It doesn't have so if the total 30% threshold is met by one of them, you're in a good place. But you have to have this. If you don't have this for your state hate crimes grant, you'll have issues with reimbursement. So I'd make my personal advice is, once you identify what your projects are, right, you've submitted for your spending, start with finding vendors that can get you to that 15% threshold. The CSI team can help you. Again, we're not going to put out names of vendors here. We can help you get those bids out to appropriate vendors, and you can see when they apply that they're MWBE, and you can make sure you hit that threshold. But it is a requirement for the hate crimes.
A point on vendors and the state list. I've run into, and again, I'm just sharing my specific experience with a few facilities that I've worked with. The state list may contain names of vendors that are all very large security companies. those large security companies have, unfortunately, very little appetite sometimes to work on projects that have, let's say, $150,000 budget. They may choose to work on projects that are starting at least at $500,000. Okay. Now, I'm not saying that's a threshold for everyone, right? For all contractors, a lot of their appetites are seasonal. Maybe they have more projects or they have fewer projects. It depends. But I found that these larger firms sometimes will not be very forthcoming or reactive to the needs of the facility and the timing of bids or participating in one and so on. So please, to Dov's point, it's very important to coordinate with the JCRC team. The reason being is that we've been amalgamating a lot of experience from different sites. And we also see, depending on the size of the facility, depending on the complexity of the project or the overall budget, what would be some of the best options for your facility. So that's something to keep in mind.
Thanks, Ilya. And Dov, a lot of these I'm flipping to you because of your former experience with the state. What organizations can and what organizations cannot access the state contractor list, the state vendor list?
So let me clarify. There's actually two lists that I think we're intermingling. There's the State Office of General Services list, OGS, that technically, if you use a vendor off this list, you can bypass a lot of procurement rules, but you know it brings its own set of steps that you need to follow. Then there's what we're talking about here, right? So the OGS list, any state, any location in New York State can use vendors off the OGS list for these grants. The MWBE approved vendors are to help you meet that 30% threshold. So they're actually two different approved vendors. I would focus right now, if you're a state hate crimes recipient, on starting with MWBE vendors as you move forward. We can share the link also to identifying these vendors, but our team as well knows the response. Some aren't responsive. That's what we've learned. You dig in this list, you try, you find a great vendor, they don't respond. So you did your effort. So we have some that can help, that we know are out there, that are familiar with the grant rules. So when you pepper them with all your procurements and filling out forms, they're familiar with it, so they're not pushed off by it. So definitely that's something offline, if you know what projects you're doing, to reach out to your security manager. I did see a question, sorry to jump ahead, Bill.
If I can jump in just for a second. David Pollock here. Within the next week, we're going to be sending surveys to people who have had grants in the past. I know there are people on this call who are very experienced, and we want to know who you use and your experiences with them. And that will, we're figuring out a way, based on something that Ilya had initially developed, to get that information out and share it with the field.
And before we close out MWBE, Bill, so technically in your nonprofit security grant program contract, you should make an effort to find MWBE vendors, but it is not a requirement like the state hate crimes grant. The state hate crimes grant being a totally state funded and managed grant, that is a strict requirement. You have to meet the 30% threshold. The federal grant, the NSGP, you're supposed to make the effort, but you will not be penalized if you don't meet it. But it is in your contract.
Thank you, Dov. I have one remaining question. Again, it has to do with the EHP and changing or modifying projects. For instance, the institution that asked the question is adding 2 additional camera locations to those already specified in their original EHP. Those 2 additional locations are not listed on the EHP. Are those new locations considered additional projects? And do they have to start fresh with that? How does that work? Because inevitably, institutions, after 2 years of waiting, come upon circumstances where they have to modify or change their approach?
Yeah. That's a great question. And the reality is sometimes you won't get a clear-cut answer from your state rep. Sometimes I describe it like this. The state reps are like the referees, right? They tell you when you're out of bounds, but they're not helping you run the plays, right? You don't have that coach to help you run the plays. So if technically you're only approved to install to the EHP, right? What you designed, the camera here, camera there, door here. And utilizing funds outside that, you'd have to get approved. So what would happen is, let's say you had a certain amount allocated for cameras, for external cameras, and based on the amount you had allocated, you actually could do more than you originally assumed. You found a good vendor, good prices, and they could do a few more. You'll probably have to submit a new AHP, as these are additional cameras. At the least, get that answer by the state. How they expect you to move forward. Maybe you don't have to do a whole new EHP, but saying we have we have additional wiggle room in our budget. We want to add these cameras and do the same thing. Put a picture in and add it to what you were doing. But I would not move forward without that state giving you the yes or no there.
And something that we should all remember, that although there have been some new program representatives added to the team, they're generally there to help us, not to pull a gotcha. So,
Exactly.
I always recommend, ask Mother May I before you go do anything, and get cleared, because at that point, once you've been cleared step by step, you're pretty certain that you can get reimbursed at the end of the process. If you spring anything on them, they may say you missed a step and we can't pay for that. So, and they don't want to do more work than they have to. So they're not going to say you have to do a whole new EHP unless you have to do a whole new EHP. What we found in the past year is lots of people are changing what they initially asked for. And at that point, with the federal grants, the program representative and DSHES has to submit the new plan to FEMA and get a new approval of the plan. That's something that, we can help you with, but it's a step-by-step process. And it sometimes seems frustrating, but, if you've, have an assessment from us, what you need, and and we can help you get what you need and prioritize what you need. Dov?
I'd also say if your specific needs for additional, let's say in this case, these are cameras, please be mindful of explaining and justifying these additions as part of a system that's already been approved. So, because to be honest with you, adding a couple of cameras, those are, for all intents and purposes, as far as the system is concerned, those are trivial additions. Okay, they're not going to change the entire layout of the system. They're not going to affect how the system performs. So we're not really completely changing the security control. We're simply adding coverage in areas that otherwise had not been covered and now need to be. So it's simply more an issue of, hey, we identified 2 blind spots. We want to cover them, but the system will not be changed. It's just 2 additional viewing points that we're adding with video surveillance, but they plug in to the system that has been already approved. So I think that's also a good point to mention to your grant representative.
And, just to make it a little bit clearer, if you are a landmark, make sure that the EHP shows all the exterior changes you're making, because that can be an EHP change. We have, even if you're more than 50 years old, we have a very suburban looking synagogue on Long Island that has had no ends of headaches about their doors. So those are things that, you have to get it cleared up front, let them know what you're doing, and then, you can work with that. What you do with the lock is not going to be a big deal, but what you do with the door will be. So, those are things that, have to be cleared in an EHP.
Thank you, David. I've seen a few more questions, Bill. Some we should address. We'll stick around as long as your questions come in. That's the plan here.
So just one big generic question. Let's remind everybody how we're going to announce future Consultants Corners and how they can register and get that information.
What was the question one more time, Bill? So each week you should receive an email. You'll receive probably 2. As it gets closer, you'll receive the second one. And as we announce each week's Consultants Corner with the topic, you'll also receive the link from this week's or the prior week audio presentation as well. We're going to include that where we're going to have that on YouTube so people could take a look if they were able missed it, or they need anybody else in their organization to see the presentation, they can do so. Each week we'll announce the topic. So towards the end of this week, we'll be announcing the topic for next Tuesday, 10 a.m. in Consultants Corner.
Seth, what about people that had the link sent to them? As word went out in the community, some people passed the information about this session on to others, but they may not have necessarily got a direct invite. How do they ensure that they're notified each week of what the session's going to be?
So they need to make sure that they reach out to their regional security manager or use that CSI questions email and see if we can add you to our notification list with the organization. Give us all the information, what organization you're with, contact phone number, contact email, your position within that organization. And if you're not in our database, we can add you underneath that organization. And then not only these emails regarding the Consultants Corner, but you can receive other information that we provide as well. Each week, so if someone passes along this link, if one person logs on with that link, it's individualized. They shouldn't be able to log on with another person from that same link. Each person needs to register individually for Consultants Corner to make sure that you're able to get on and don't have any resistance in logging in.
Right, and I got one more question for Dove that wasn't in the chat box because I didn't put it there. But it kind of ties back into how we started out the program with HFLS, the Hebrew Free Loan Society. So I know what you say over and over again, and I know it's vitally important that they don't do anything until the contract period begins in January, at least with the most recent grant. However, in the grant process, they have a lot of pre-qualifications, correct? So Hebrew Free Loan has a sort of pre-qualification process too. And if I'm not mistaken, I believe that our participants, if they're interested or they think they might need a loan, they can start exploring that with Hebrew Free Loan, correct? It's not, because they do have a pre-qualification process too. So we always encourage people to take whatever steps they can before a grant comes up to make sure they're pre-qualified. How does that pertain to Hebrew Free Loan?
I'm saying that's a great question. We definitely want to hear from Fred too, so I am glad you're still on. That's a great question. So to clarify, you definitely don't want to be doing any project. When the state says you can't move forward with the project, they mean actually having anything installed or dealing with potential bidders. So I think it's to work with the Hebrew Free Loan team is appropriate. It's kind of outside the purview of actually using your funds and doing any physical alterations to your building is some of the terminology they use. Fred, you want to add anything?
No, I'm just saying again, as I said earlier, that we're available just to, again, for you to feel out, what your situation is and if you would be approved using your current situation. So I don't want to get in the way of anyone with the official state requirements, but just sort of, just to get a feel for what your situation is and whether you would get approved.
Yeah, that's, I think it was important to put out there. So I think that we can encourage anybody who thinks that they may have issues with funding, because it is a procurement process and reimbursement process, that they reach out to Fred and Darren to see what they can and can't do, and what HFLS might be able to do for them. Thanks, Fred.
Thank you.
More questions, Bill?
There actually are a couple more coming in. Give me one moment. There are two. The first one's a shorty. How do you use the OGS vendor list? How do you access that? How do you find vendors that you need?
There's a link we can share with you to find those. We didn't get into this in this session, and I don't want to go too deep, but technically, if you use a state-approved vendor, this is separate than MWBE. You don't have to follow all the procurement rules in terms of advertising and sealed bids. Everything has its pros and cons, and maybe in a future session we'll talk about that. But I think even if you do, you still should be very mindful of the installations you're doing. Work with our team that it's not the vendor coming in telling you how to install and trying to get in and out real quick. We want to make sure you really have a good program that actually improves your security levels.
Thanks, Doug. And the next question is something I hear over and over again. There's a lot of confusion out there when it comes to planning, training, and exercises. The specifics on this question is organizations in the process of writing bid proposals for planning, training, and exercises. This is an NSGP awardee. Their contract instructed them to do separate proposals for each consultant service. And the question is that for training, the state reimburses on a per attendee basis, and you don't seem to do a proposal for training. It's true that NSGP and the hate crimes, the state programs are different, but it's confusing. They need a trainer to create a custom training for their facility, or is that considered an exercise? A colleague of the participant did one proposal for all consultant services for the hate crimes grant. Can you give clarification? I think the big one is that the state programs and the federal programs are different. The rules are different. Maybe you can elaborate further on that.
Gotcha. Thanks, Bill. Reading into that question from Faye, thank you. So there actually, I think to step back a bit, there actually are different types of within what we call consulting services. There are different approved categories, right? So you might be approved for a training and consulting planning, right? Training and planning. They should correlate, right? You shouldn't be training someone based on something that's not your plan, and vice versa. But technically, these are separate budget categories, and you should approach it the same as you would do any other piece of hardware or installation. So there should be your specs that you create, what you want the training to be, what you want the planning to be, what you want exercises to be, and that you would put out there to the vendors so that they can put their bid forward. They would have to even if it's the same vendor, that's two separate bids, one for the plan they're creating and one for the training. Two separate bids. We've seen this is how it goes forward. They need to be separate, and they'd have to invoice you separately, and you'd have to put reimbursement documents forward separately. So I think that should kind of clarify the separate buckets. They should relate, but they're separate spending categories, just like cameras and access control might be. Exercises are more about, you want to actually have them do a drill or a response, act out a response with your team. Think about, the Port Authority at the airport doing an exercise where they're in their gear, orange vests, versus just a training where someone's in front of the room. Obviously, there's some more nuances here, but you definitely, and even the custom training, they should. I mean, if I took a bid proposal, and I want to hear more from Ilya on this end too, but if I took a bid proposal on a training, I wouldn't want a canned thing. A lot of it is going to be what the general principles are, but it should be tailored to your facility. They should come to your place. They should do a walkthrough. They should understand your culture and operations, so it can be tailored to you. It doesn't mean it's from scratch, but it should definitely be tailored to your location.
There have been a number of occasions when training vendors marketed their generic either emergency management training programs, and so on. And those, unfortunately, they don't seem to change. They don't seem to be tailored. And unfortunately, they are not very useful. So to Dov's point, I support the idea and also the approach that a training should be bid out separately from consulting services. You should be mindful of your specific needs. We certainly, as a team, if you reach out, can help you think about kind of what requirements to set out in your proposal, so that you can tell the bidders what is it that you need, what should they be mindful of. And I always am a big believer in pre-bid meetings, walkthroughs, and the explanation of how your facility operates. Because if a vendor who wants to train you just wants to show up and do the training and collect their check, but they don't understand how you work, then I'm sorry, that's a tick box in the making. So it's not something we recommend. So I just wanted to share that with you.
And yeah, Faye, I see your comment about the additional cost. It's still, they're like separate buckets of additional costs. So we still needs to be separate bids, separate invoices, separate procurement documents when you put in for reimbursement.
All right, that's all we have, I think, for in terms of questions for now.
There was a question about the state's presentations. They usually email it to the recipients after the session. We'll look to, I know David usually posts a lot of information on the JCRC-NY.org/security grants website. A lot of information there will really help you step along. So hopefully as soon as that's shared by the state, we can post that as well.
There will be a Consultants Corner webpage, which will, is a perfect place to post those kinds of, that kind of information. We're going to archive these sessions, and, hopefully you'll be able to search that webpage for the topic that you are interested in, and, give you more help there.
Right. With that, I think we're going to wrap up this week's session, and thank you for your questions. Look forward to following up. And hopefully we'll see most of you next week. Have a good week.
Thank you, everybody.
Everyone, stay safe.